Have you ever had that nagging feeling deep down that something just has to change inside you for you to really thrive? Like you're carrying stuff, burdens, old habits, maybe even parts of yourself that just don't work anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe they never did.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. It's that kind of universal yearning for something,
More.
for wholeness, right? Especially with all the noise out there.
Right.
And people often describe it as feeling, well, haunted. Like there's something just beneath the surface, a version of you that's been kind of stitched together from fear, maybe needing approval, or just survival tactics.
And silence too, right? The things left unsaid.
Exactly. And the really frustrating thing is, you might have tried all sorts of things, affirmations, therapy, maybe even retreats,
Yeah.
and you still feel like there's this echo of a self that doesn't quite fit, that isn't really you.
That is precisely the territory we're diving into today. We're doing a deep dive into Anthony Abbin's book, What You Must Kill to Become, The Hidden Cost of Wholeness. Now, let's be really clear up front. This is not your typical cozy self-help book.
No, not at all.
Abbin himself says flat out, it's not a comfortable book. In fact, he explicitly invites you to die rather than just, improve yourself a bit.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a pretty provocative statement right there.
It really is. And what's so fascinating is how he frames this whole journey. It's not some gentle evolution. He calls it a confrontation, a sword, even a mirror.
Okay.
He's basically talking to that part of you that just knows deep down that a profound shift is needed, that something actually has to die for your true self to really live.
So our mission today then is to unpack Abbin's really powerful and often quite counterintuitive perspective on transformation, personal, spiritual transformation.
Right. We'll look at the specific deaths or maybe renunciations he talks about and explore how letting go of this stuff is presented as this, well, radical path to resurrection, to becoming who he says God whispered into existence before time began.
We're definitely going to tackle some challenging ideas, but maybe liberating ones too. Things like confronting the belief that life should be fair, or that constant urge to please everybody. Or even that subtle fear of being alone that maybe we don't always admit to.
Yeah.
It sounds intense, I know. But the promise is, well, profound transformation.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning. What's Abbin's core idea here?
Okay, so his foundational argument is pretty radical. He says, not everything deserves to be healed. Not everything inside you is worth keeping.
Wow.
Yeah, he puts it bluntly. Some parts of us, some aspects, they need to be thrown into the fire so the soul can rise clean.
So it's not just about fixing things.
Not at all. It's more like a spiritual funeral. He sees people trying all the usual healing methods, but still feeling held back by this version of themselves that was born from fear, needing approval, just trying to survive, staying silent. And that version, he argues, must die. Not because you're fundamentally broken, but because you were sort of trained or conditioned to be less than who you were truly designed to be.
It's like we've been trying to renovate a shaky building, but just painting the walls.
Exactly.
When really some structures need to come down entirely. So if simple healing isn't always the answer, what's the alternative he proposes?
He talks about spiritual execution. Now, obviously, that's not literal.
Right, okay.
It's a metaphor for a kind of mercy killing of the illusions, the addictions, the expectations, the attachments that keep us, small and quiet and stuck.
Mercy killing. That's an interesting phrase.
It is. And he uses another strong term, holy violence, which sounds jarring, I know.
Yeah, a bit.
But he means that forceful, deliberate action you sometimes need to take to break free from really ingrained patterns. Think of like a surgeon making a precise cut to remove something harmful. It's targeted, it's for healing, for liberation, not just destruction.
Okay, I get that framing. Like breaking chains.
Exactly. He says this process sets captives free. It breaks what he calls generational echoes, those patterns we inherit and repeat without even realizing it sometimes. And ultimately, it makes you unrecognizable to your former chains.
And the payoff for this really challenging path.
Right.
What's the promise?
Abbin writes, every chapter is a death, and every death is a door. His belief is that as you go through this process, embracing these necessary deaths, you actually rise again.
Rise again. How?
He says, not as who you were taught to be, but as who God whispered into existence before time began. So the call is, bury the lies, burn the masks, slay the imposter, kill what you must, and become.
That feels like Yeah, the ultimate personal excavation project.
Definitely. And one of the first and maybe toughest beliefs he targets is this illusion of fairness. We've all heard life isn't fair.
Sure, yeah.
But how many of us truly kill the belief that it should be fair? Abbin calls this the false expectation that life should be fair. A quiet killer dressed in idealism.
A quiet killer.
Wow. Yeah. And he makes a really sharp distinction between God's justice and our human idea of fairness. He says, fairness is transactional. Righteousness is relational.
Okay, break that down a bit. Transactional versus relational.
Well, fairness is like, if I do X, I should get Y. It's an exchange.
Right. If I'm good, good things should happen to me.
Exactly. But righteousness, in his view, is more about the relationship, the trust. It's like saying, even when things go wrong, even when it's unfair, I trust the one holding me.
That's a big shift. He talks about something called the phantom contract, right? These secret contracts in our heart.
Yes, these are assumptions like, if I serve God faithfully, I won't lose my job, or if I pray hard enough, I won't get sick. They're not written down anywhere.
No.
But they're these deep, often unconscious if-then bargains we make with life or with God.
And we build our lives around them.
We do, but Abbin argues these were never actually promises from God. They were assumptions, often born out of our own fear or our need for control. So when life inevitably breaks these contracts, because life is unpredictable, we feel betrayed.
Yeah, that makes sense. You feel let down.
But Abbin reframes it. He says, you're not being betrayed, you're being awakened. Awakened to the reality that God never promised fairness in the way we think of it. He promised his presence, his grace, through whatever happens.
Okay, so the breakdown of the contract is actually an opportunity.
In a way, yes, an awakening. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. When we don't kill that fairness idol, he says it mutates into bitterness. And that bitterness, he points out, always disguises itself as moral outrage. It feels like righteous anger, like justice.
Right, you feel justified in being angry.
Exactly. But he calls it grief-wearing armor. He uses biblical examples like Cain feeling it was unfair, his offering wasn't accepted, or Esau, or the elder brother in the prodigal son story.
They all feel cheated by unfairness.
Yes. And Abbin's point is that God never plays by the logic of fairness, not our human transactional logic anyway.
And what about Jesus? How does he fit in?
Well, Abbin argues Jesus shattered the myth of fairness forever. Think about it. He healed people who didn't thank him. He gave Judas a place at the Last Supper, knowing full well what was coming.
Yeah.
He carried a cross he absolutely didn't deserve. He wasn't fighting for fairness. He was surrendering to a much higher purpose. The call isn't for a fair life, Abbin says, but a fulfilled life. And paradoxically, that fulfillment comes when you die to that entitlement.
So practically speaking, what does killing this belief do for us?
Well, it can free you up. You can stop resenting people who seem to get things easily. You can stop punishing yourself with unrealistic expectations. And crucially, you stop blaming God when life throws curveballs.
It allows for deeper trust, maybe.
Exactly. A deeper posture of trust, knowing God's character is good even when circumstances feel totally unfair. So for you listening, maybe ask yourself, where am I still demanding fairness? What are those old unspoken contracts I need to just tear up?
That connects really well to the next point, doesn't it?
Right.
This idea of needing external validation,
Yeah.
which often fuels the next thing to kill.
Yeah.
The version of you that's built just to please others.
Oh, absolutely. Abbin argues this version never should have existed. It was built, not born. It's the self you constructed to fit in, to be accepted.
And in doing so,
Yeah.
you're quietly killing your true self.
Yeah, he calls people-pleasing self-abandonment in slow motion. It's chilling because so many of us don't even realize how much our personality is actually, well, a cage.
We mistake being agreeable for being good, or shrinking ourselves for being humble.
Right. It's a false self, designed by fear of judgment, fear of rejection, not by, divine intention.
So how does this mask get built?
It happens when your real self, your honest opinions, your true feelings, your quirks gets punished or ignored or misunderstood. So you learn, you adapt, you become the version that avoids conflict, the one that gets praised instead of questioned. You start living through a filter. You're edited, as he puts it, not free.
And God doesn't anoint the edited version.
That's his point. God anoints the authentic you. Now, this isn't about being deliberately rude or abrasive.
No, of course not.
It's about being real. He has this great line, love without truth is not love, it's codependency.
Oof. That hits hard. And what about the need for approval itself? He calls it an addiction.
Yeah, like a drug. It gives you that temporary high, that feeling of validation, of belonging, but it ultimately leaves you empty because, as he says, the price of acceptance is always authenticity.
You trade your real self for being liked.
Exactly. And look at Jesus, the ultimate contrast. He never chased approval. He ruffled feathers, confused people, broke norms.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly Mr. Popularity with the establishment.
Not at all. His focus was laser sharp. Alignment with heaven, not winning a popularity contest on earth.
So the cost of becoming whole might mean losing some approval.
That's what Abbin suggests. He says the cost is usually the comfort of the crowd. You might lose some fans, but look at the gain. Clarity of soul, integrity of voice, peace with yourself, alignment with heaven. That's a pretty compelling trade-off.
It really is powerful stuff. Makes you think, doesn't it? What version of yourself are you still maintaining, maybe out of habit or fear, that doesn't serve your real purpose anymore? Who are you trying to protect or appease by staying silent, by wearing that mask? Maybe it's time to let that version go.
And that flows so naturally into the next point, killing what was never meant to survive in you in the first place.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Abbin argues that not everything that lives in you was meant to live. He's talking about habits, coping mechanisms, even personality traits that are essentially armor you built. Things born from trauma, not from truth.
Armor, like defenses.
Exactly. Things that were necessary for survival then, but now they're hindering you. He uses that phrase, the version of you that developed in war, but is now keeping you from peace.
Can you give some examples?
Sure, like the bitterness that lingers long after a betrayal, or the chronic anxiety that started because of past unpredictability, or maybe that defensiveness that kicks in because you weren't heard way back when.
Ah, okay, so they're reactions.
Reactions to pain, yeah. Protections against people. He even calls them spiritual parasites, things feeding off your life force, but not truly part of you.
And we often defend these things, don't we? Like, oh, that's just how I am.
Precisely. He calls that the false gospel of personality. We defend these traits as if they're core to our identity, but he argues they were often formed without our consent. They're reactions, not inherent truths.
So the gospel, in his view, isn't about polishing that existing personality.
No, it comes to resurrect your true identity, which means a new birth, and for something new to be born, something must die. That old reactive self has to go.
But pain can teach us things, right?
Oh, absolutely. Pain can be a powerful teacher. But, he warns, pain can also lie. It might teach you never to trust again, or to always expect disappointment, or to shrink your heart to avoid more hurt. If that pain response stays too long, it stops being a lesson and starts shaping, even distorting your reality.
So acknowledging the trauma is important.
Critical. Your trauma is real, he affirms, but your trauma is not your truth. You are not defined by your wounds or your defense mechanisms.
So how do we deal with these ingrained trauma-born parts?
He calls for holy excavation, like spiritual archaeology.
Okay.
You have to deliberately dig in and question everything. Long-held beliefs, automatic reflexes, knee-jerk reactions. Ask yourself honestly, did God put this in me, or did pain put it there?
That sounds like hard work.
He calls it sacred surgery and mercy toward your becoming. It's not about self-hatred. It's about lovingly, intentionally cutting away what's hindering your true self from growing.
It makes me think of that parable, the sower and the seeds. The thorns choking the good plants.
Exactly that image, those old vines, those unhealed roots from past hurts. They can literally choke out what God is trying to grow in you now.
So the reflection for the listener here is, what attitudes, what instincts, what habits in your life are really rooted in survival mode, not in the spirit? What personality traits feel more like prisons than authentic expressions?
That's the core question.
Yeah.
And related to managing how we appear, Abbin also targets another area for execution, like urge to constantly explain yourself.
Ah, yes. Trying to make sure everyone understands you.
Right. He calls it a prison made of words. This addiction to being understood, he argues, actually makes you less free to obey God. Because, as he puts it, explaining yourself becomes a performance, a trap.
That section really got me thinking. He connects this need to explain to the energy we spend managing your image.
Yes, and he says that energy can actively delay your mandate, your purpose. The more effort you pour into protecting your reputation, your name, the less you're actually walking in his name, in his purpose.
And the example of Jesus is so powerful here. Falsely accused, facing Pilate.
He opened not his mouth. Because, Abbin suggests, purpose was louder than perception. And sometimes, silence is not weakness, it is warfare.
Wow. Silence is warfare. That reframes everything.
It really does. Abbin's point is that not everyone deserves access to your why. Trying to explain yourself to people who've already made up their minds about you or who aren't genuinely seeking understanding.
It's like casting pearls before swine.
Exactly his analogy. He says it just feeds the wolves. There's real wisdom in secrecy sometimes, holiness in privacy, and immense strength in letting God be your vindicator instead of constantly fighting to justify yourself.
Where does this urge to over-explain come from, usually?
Often he links it back to past experiences, maybe even trauma, being constantly misunderstood as a kid, perhaps. Or feeling like love and acceptance were conditional, like you had to earn them by making sure everyone approved of your reasons.
So leads back to that performance aspect.
Right, which he calls slavery wearing a smile. The key for Abbin is discernment. Knowing when it's right and necessary to speak up, to correct, to clarify, versus when the wiser, stronger path is to just seal your lips and walk away.
Okay, so the question for you listening becomes, what parts of your identity are still tangled up with what other people think of you? Who are you still trying to convince when maybe God has already confirmed who you are?
And that whole theme of external validation, needing others' approval or understanding, ties right into the next major point: killing our attachment to outcomes.
Wanting things to turn out a certain way.
Exactly. Abbin says this attachment is often really subtle. It can even hide inside our dreams, our ambitions, even our faith. But underneath, he argues, it's usually a need for control, a kind of betting on results, and he states it clearly. You are not free until you're free from the outcome.
Control. That feels like such a basic human instinct, though. Survival reflex.
It is. It promises peace through predictability, right? If I can just control this situation, then I'll be okay. But Abbin counters, the kingdom is not built on control. It's built on surrender.
So what happens when we are addicted to outcomes? What does that look like?
Well, he says it sabotages your own peace. It leads to obsession, constant striving, maybe even manipulation to try and force the result you want. Panic when things don't go according to plan. Questioning your worth, your faith, even God himself.
It sounds exhausting, like life becomes
a constant performance and God into a vending machine. You put in the right actions, you expect the right result to pop out.
Yeah, okay. But isn't faith about believing for good outcomes?
That's the nuanced part. Abbin argues that true, mature faith isn't actually outcome-based. He points to Hebrews 11, the hall of faith, people like Abraham, Moses, David. Their faith was anchored in obedience and trust, often without knowing the final result or even seeing the full promise fulfilled in their lifetime.
So maturity in the spirit looks like obeying without knowing the ending.
That's the quote. It's a radical trust in the guide, not just the destination map.
What does this attachment do to us internally?
Well, he lists several things. Deep anxiety, confusion about our identity, like, am I only valuable if I succeed? Spiritual bargaining, God, if you do this, I'll do that. And bitterness when things don't pan out. Plus, it just robs you of enjoying the actual journey, the process, the present moment.
So how do we break free? What's the model?
Again, he points to Jesus, specifically the prayer in Gethsemane. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Abbin calls this the ultimate death of outcome addiction and the simultaneous birth of spiritual freedom.
It's surrender, then.
Yes, but reframed. Not surrender as giving up in defeat, but surrender as giving over in trust. Placing your desires, your hopes, your outcomes into higher, wiser hands.
That's a really helpful distinction. Giving over, not giving up. So for you listening, where are you clinging tightly, demanding a specific ending? What result are you maybe afraid to release control of?
Which brings us almost full circle back to managing perceptions. Next up, kill the need to be liked.
Another big one. Maybe the most common one.
Could be. Abbin calls it an invisible and more praised prison. It often masquerades as just being nice or kind or wise, but he argues its root is usually fear, and it leads to the slow death of your original self.
An invisible prison, because society often rewards being agreeable, right?
Exactly. He says we weren't born needing constant approval, but somewhere along the way, maybe through painful experiences, the eyes of other people replace the eyes of God as our primary mirror. And that causes what he calls soul fracture.
Soul fracture.
Yeah. We start shape-shifting, muting our real passions, softening our true voice, watering down our convictions. All for what? He asks a pat on the back. You can't, as he puts it, carry glory and still crave applause.
Wow. That's direct.
He quotes John 12.43, "They loved the praise of men more than the praise of God." He calls that a curse, because whatever you love more ultimately shapes who you become.
So idolizing being liked has real consequences.
Definitely. You compromise your integrity. You stay silent when truth needs a voice. You become, in his words, politically correct but spiritually useless. He even references Luke 6.26, "Woe unto you when all men speak well of you." It's a stark warning against seeking universal approval.
Because Jesus himself certainly didn't have it.
Not even close. Misunderstood, hated, abandoned. Yet Abbin emphasizes he never adjusted his truth to win their favor. He let followers walk away rather than dilute his message. Why? Because purpose is not built on popularity.
So what about rejection? If we stop trying so hard to be liked, rejection is inevitable, right?
Yes, but he reframes rejection too. It's not always a personal attack. Sometimes, he suggests, it's divine editing.
Divine editing, like pruning.
Kind of, like pruning your audience so your voice isn't just echoing opinions, but can actually carry oil, carry real substance and anointing.
So killing this need, what's the freedom on the other side?
You stop performing. You start speaking with genuine authority, not borrowed confidence. You make decisions based on conviction, not validation. You become a mirror reflecting truth, not a chameleon constantly changing colors. Yes, he admits, you will also be free. That's a trade many might be willing to make, even if it's scary. So the question for you is, where are you still adjusting yourself? Maybe subtly to get that pat on the back. What part of you is still performing instead of just living?
And finally, the last major kill Abbin discusses is kill the fear of being alone.
Ooh, that's a deep one too. Aloneness can feel terrifying.
It can. But Abbin turns it on its head. He says, aloneness is not the enemy. It is the womb of true identity. It's the space where God often speaks loudest. It's where you're forced, in a good way, to meet the version of you that doesn't need applause or validation or a crowd to feel whole.
Why are we so afraid of it, typically?
Well, partly conditioning, right? We equate presence with love, connection with value, and let's be honest, busyness is a great distraction. Yeah, it keeps you from having to sit with yourself.
Exactly. Aloneness confronts us, he says. It reveals what we've been suppressing, what we've neglected inside. It exposes the hollowness we've hidden behind community. But he insists that true wholeness requires stillness. The stillness of being okay, being at home, in your own soul, even when no one else is physically there.
He makes a distinction, doesn't he, between isolation and solitude.
Yes, a crucial one. Isolation is fear-based, he writes. It builds a wall. It tends to make you bitter or withdrawn. But solitude is faith-based. It's like digging a well. It makes you better, deeper.
And the Bible is full of examples of solitude, isn't it?
Absolutely. Jesus, Moses, Jacob wrestling the angel, Elijah hearing the still, small voice. They all frequently withdrew into solitude to encounter God. Abbin notes, the weightiest encounters in Scripture happened in spaces void of crowds.
So community is important, but it can't replace that interconnection.
Precisely. People cannot fill the God void, he states plainly. Attention cannot anchor identity. Your true measure isn't your social circle, it's who you are when the applause fades. We need communion with the divine, not just community with others, to be truly sustained. If you can't stand alone, you'll crumble when external support inevitably shifts or fades.
He talks about divine loneliness. What's that?
It's like a holy, purposeful season where God might intentionally draw you away from the noise, away from constant companionship, specifically to purify your perception.
To hear more clearly.
Exactly. It's in that space, he suggests, that you shed false names others have given you. You detox from the noise of opinions and expectations, and you finally deeply hear that core truth. You are mine.
So killing the fear of being alone transforms it.
Yes, you move from fear to fire. You gain the freedom to detach from unhealthy relationships without crippling guilt. You find unexpected strength in silence. You hear God more clearly. You start carrying an authority that doesn't depend on crowd size. You find your true self in consecration, not just in company.
That's profound. So maybe the final reflection here is, what noise are you using, maybe unconsciously, to distract yourself from an inner quiet, maybe even an emptiness? Are you willing, truly willing, to sit in the silence long enough to meet the real you, the one God intended?
And importantly, Abbin doesn't just leave you with these heavy concepts. He includes a bonus section, prayers and practices for inner execution.
Right, making it practical.
Exactly. He calls this section not just an appendix, but an altar. A place where the revelations you've read must now become decisions you embody. Because transformation isn't just information, it's activated by encounter, obedience, and practice.
That's key, isn't it? Moving from just knowing it to actually doing it. What are some examples of these practices?
Well, there's one called the daily funeral. It's like a morning declaration where you consciously choose truth over comfort, becoming over surviving, fire over fear.
Okay.
Another is the silence fast. Just 1 hour a week with no speaking, no posting, no responding, just sitting, listening, breathing, and asking yourself honestly, what am I without external feedback?
That sounds challenging, but powerful.
It does. And there's the grave in the garden, which is more visual. You literally list out what must die in your life and what will rise in its place. These are tools basically for intentional inner death to help you actively name, crucify, and bury that false self. It's about taking ownership of your transformation.
So wrapping this deep dive up, we've journeyed through Anthony Abbin's really potent call to, well, dismantle the false selves, the attachments, the fears, so we can embrace genuine wholeness.
Yeah, the core message is stop just surviving. Survival is not your destiny. Resurrection is. It's a call to start truly living, not just coping.
And he grounds this whole process in relationship, doesn't he? That line you mentioned earlier.
Right. Truth is not an idea. It is a person. Jesus did not say, I know the truth. He said, I am the truth. So for Abbin, walking closely with Jesus means tearing down lies, burying identities built on pain, dismantling those altars we've built to false comforts. It's inherently disruptive work.
Sounds disruptive, yeah. Maybe even painful.
Dismantling often is. But he argues it's fundamentally divine work, necessary work.
He has that concluding thought that really sticks with you. You cannot step into the fullness of who you are and still cling to the fragments of who you were.
There has to be a letting go, a burial, a goodbye, severing. He basically positions the book itself as the funeral service for your old way of being.
And this moment, right now, as the potential threshold to the new, resurrected you.
And he leaves you with this powerful affirmation. You are not a survivor, you are a son, or a daughter, presumably. You are not a product of their treatment, you are a prophecy in motion. And crucially, what is waiting for you is not a better version, it is a resurrected one.
A resurrected one. That's a completely different paradigm than just self-improvement. So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. Reflecting on everything we've talked about, what specific, maybe subtle lie are you still living under right now? Or what deeply ingrained comfort, what pattern, what fear are you still clinging to? And just consider, how might embracing its death, as Abbin puts it, actually unlock the prophecy you were truly designed to be? That resurrected version of you.